Welcome to the InitiativeOne Leadership Podcast, where we help leaders maximize their impact and transform their lives. I'm your host, Nick Nighbor, as well as the VP of Strategic Partnership for InitiativeOne. Today's guest is InitiativeOne's very own Stephanie Schultz. Stephanie is the Vice President of Retail and Manufacturing, and she's also one of our transformation facilitators who loves to help coach people through growth. Her two-word purpose is inspire growth. And recently, Stephanie's been working with individuals and organizations, and we recently came together on this topic of remote work, people working in the office and out of the office. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on. So let's go ahead. Let's get to it right away. Tell me about some of the challenges that you're hearing about with remote work as a topic.
It's a great question. And honestly, while everybody's dealing with a slightly different situation, some are partially back to the office. It's a hybrid situation. Some people are fully remote. Some have a mix. The similar thing that I'm continuing to hear is, how do we keep people engaged? But what's even more interesting is that one of the recurring themes that we're hearing is, we're not having any issues with people who were here pre-COVID. They understand our culture and they're keeping it going strong. Where we do see the issue, though, is with new hires. And obviously with the Great Resignation and all of that type of stuff, people have really been moving around a lot in the last couple of years. So there are a lot of new people who don't necessarily know the culture of these organizations pre-COVID, if you will. So trying to find ways to not only engage and re-engage your people who had been there for a while, but also those who are new to the organization, to truly bring them into the culture that you know and want to keep going forward.
So this has been a topic for the last 2 to 3 years with remote, when someone's coming on brand new, there's always all right, we're going to get started here. This is what you're going to learn about. This is a whole new topic on, hey, you're going to be out of the office. So this is how things are going to, companies now need to train almost on how to deal with this dynamic.
100%. And that's one of the pieces that we've talked a lot about is, from a logistics standpoint, HR can set up we need to send you a computer, we can get you onboarded in all of the check the box ways. But then it really comes down to, how do you want to bring them into the team? And that's kind of creating your own checklist of sorts. And one of the things that we often talk through is the fact that there does need to be some guidance of, what are the things we want to make sure that they pick up on, again, whether that's specific to a team culture or, the organization as a whole, but really also leaving that open. And we talked a little bit in a group last week about, creating mentees essentially for the new people. And one of the biggest things, because I had this experience through the pandemic as well, you come on and I was literally one of the people who came into the office every single day. And It wasn't because I felt like I, quote, needed to be there. I was literally trying to connect with people, and everybody's cadence in the office was totally different. So it was one of those interesting things where I felt a lot of pressure on myself of trying to make connections. And in talking to leaders, we talked about how to flip that script and really take that on as people who are members of the organization, longer tenured members of the organization that know and are comfortable with that. And by putting that, I'll call it pressure on the people who have other things already established, they know people, they can talk about relationships and who to connect with and who you might need in a meeting. That helps to not only create a friendship and a relationship there within the team, but also provides a sounding board, because as a new person, it can be, you already feel like you're asking for a lot. And that help along the way where it's like, hey, this is my safe portal to ask a question to without feeling silly, or maybe I've already heard it twice and I just, because new names, and especially if you don't have a good face, because not everybody turns their camera on. So the facial recognition with the name, sometimes all of that can just be added stuff, and added pressure to a new person, that you can alleviate that by creating that mentor-mentee relationship and guiding some of that relationship out the gate.
That's really interesting. As somebody joins an organization, usually they're entering a culture.
Mm-hmm.
They're joining a culture, and you've read books and you've heard talks about different ways to build culture. Well, now it's like, instead of just the company bringing the culture to the individual, now the individual, the employee, needs to be proactive and join that culture that has been created, but it has to be intentional. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, intentionality is huge. And, I'll go back to kind of the general things that we often talk about to get ideas flowing. Because again, this is a topic that comes up in large organizations, small organizations. I mean, you name it, everybody's kind of dealing with this right now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we will often just start with is, what worked in person works in the remote setting as well. So keeping in mind that ultimately building trust and building relationships is where it all begins. And that does require intentionality for sure. So one of the things that I again share with everybody as I kick off this topic of discussion is thinking about the different modalities of communication. Years ago, again, before remote work was really a thing, I worked in an organization where I had people who reported to me that not everybody was within the same office. There were multiple offices, and it gave me the opportunity to lead from a remote perspective as well. And it was challenging. So I asked myself the question of, how many times am I talking to the people or the teammates that are here in person? And then how many times am I talking or having touch points with those who are not? And trying to even that out, but not necessarily in a way of like making it awkward of, hey, it's my daily check-in. I want to make sure I connect with you twice today, or whatever that might be. It was intentionality, in just picking up the phone. And she was amazing at it on the other end too. I have to give her all the credit. She was one of the easiest people to lead from a remote standpoint, because she wasn't afraid to pick up the phone and just say, hey, I'm out here and I just have this one quick question. She knew it was quicker than sending a text, or especially an email, because there wasn't a guarantee that I would be watching either of those two platforms. The other piece to all of this is to really get to know people. And again, going back to that relationship and understanding, is the phone something that they're comfortable with or not? If they're people who like to be off of a screen, one of the things that we constantly are hearing, the video call fatigue. Not everybody wants to turn on their camera all the time. So in my mind, picking up the phone, while I will also admit that this is not my first modality that I go to, because you think about it, it's like, oh my gosh, do I really cold call somebody? Like, I mean, we even plan times to talk to our best friends these days, right? Like, oh yeah, 3 weeks from now on Thursday night, we should have an hour that we can connect. Like, but if it was an emergency, would you pick up the phone? Absolutely. So keeping that perspective in mind and setting the tone as the leader, respecting the fact that it will take some getting used to. You can't just assume that people will automatically be comfortable with that, but learning to pick up the phone, discuss something in real time, could be 3 minutes as opposed to trying to schedule a 30-minute block. It's much more efficient. But again, appreciating that everybody's different in how they would prefer to communicate, and just finding ways to lighten it up. And again, going back to the individual that I worked with years ago, she was the master of communicating through little emojis, and that was one of the things that it became a very big part of. We could communicate without actual words, depending on what the situation was, which was awesome, because it really was something special between her and I compared to other members of the team, simply because it was just a different way of communicating.
So there are a couple different ways. I think the big thing, what you're sharing here today, is ask yourself, like, what works, what doesn't, and everyone's going to operate differently when it comes to the communication. You talked about building trust. You talked about building those relationships. Those are things that don't happen on accident. They only happen through intentionality, which I'm glad that you really, really covered that. So what are some other specific strategies that people can use to just to get through the, just I would almost say like lack of communication, because feelings get hurt, assumptions are made, and then there's these problems that nobody signs up for, but they happen usually because there's lack of communication.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And we actually, a group that I was working with last week, we got into some of that after really brainstorming. I'm going to go back very quickly though, and talk a little bit more about the fact that not every meeting is the same. Okay. So there are a lot of different ways to come at this approach, and we will often talk through our problem solving mapping that we do at InitiativeOne. But one of the big things is to recognize that how we go about, so back to intentionality, how we go about different meetings is huge. So there's the one-to-one. How do people prefer to connect with you in that weekly touch base? And also starting each of those moments with the personal side of things. And the leader really needs to lead that, because not every person that reports to you is going to feel super comfortable with that, especially if they're new on the team, and appreciating that you truly care about the questions that you're asking. Because once you get to know somebody and understand some of the whys behind, why they might be hurried for an 8 a.m. meeting or whatever that might be. I mean, perhaps they're in a different time zone and that's 7 a.m. for them. And that's really hard to get, perhaps the child out of the house or whatever it is, understanding and appreciating again what that situation looks like. The other thing is then you also have your team meetings, and then you have like larger project meetings. Again, all of it varies based on the type of organization that you're working in and the people you're working with. So thinking about what you are setting up for each and every type of meeting, and again, keeping in mind what the preferences are for those individuals. The last piece about intentionality that I would go back to, I just don't want to miss this, is again, thinking about how often you're reaching out to people. They don't have to necessarily be people who report to you, and you don't want to make it like, okay, I crossed that off the list. But one of the things that a lot of teams are experiencing is, again, some people who perhaps are in the office, and that is the preferred setup for the organization. But you also have remote people as well. And that's simply because that's where their life is outside of the day-to-day office work. And we actually have that here at InitiativeOne. We have a great setup of, a good portion of us here in the office where we come in every single day for the most part with lots of flexibility. But then we also have people who live in other states. It works really well for our business, but it could also be very easy to sort of leave those that are on the periphery out of certain things. So understanding and appreciating, one of the things in talking to our remote employees that have done it for a decade, they've said a couple of things that have really changed the dynamic of how they feel they're a part of the group is an inter-office messaging system. So we happen to use Teams here. So the ability to have those team chats where people can feel like they're a part of it, whether they're here in person or not. And then also being just really intentional to, again, make it a point to touch base. Those of us who are in the office in person, we're going to have those natural "good morning, how you doing today, Nick" moments. But at the same point, the Nick who's remote, we wouldn't have that normal situation, but he is the first one to jump on calls intentionally about 5 minutes early so that he can connect with whoever it is. Or anytime that he might ping you, he's going to ask those personal questions because he's just really good at knowing that he wants to stay in touch with people's personal and those relational things as well. So keeping all of that in mind helps to set up success as you go into some of those specific strategies.
As you're talking about this, and as a team, as we're communicating with each other, people local here right to our office, and then other people out of state, I think of the model of 100% responsibility that InitiativeOne teaches. It's not just the organization. It's not just the leaders. It's the people that are on the team. And if we all we all take that personal responsibility to be part of the team, I think what's going to be the result is you're going to have better communication. You're going to understand how best to, some people prefer text, some people prefer email, some people prefer a phone call. And you had talked a little bit about that on the phone call is it's a lot easier to send a text message. It's a lot easier to send a chat message than it is to make a phone call. But there's really nothing that can replace that phone call. Mm-hmm. When you're calling and you're conversing back and forth live with each other. I know this is really similar. We're doing this video, using this video platform, and it's live. It's in person. We can see each other, but when you're on the phone with someone, it still creates like another dynamic that some people really appreciate that and understanding. All right, how does Stephanie prefer to be communicated with? How does Paul prefer to be communicated with? And knowing all those different dynamics of how everyone operates, I think our team does a really, really good job at, number one, really taking 100% responsibility to be in the know. Yes, we have meetings, a couple times a month because those are scheduled, but I find myself communicating with different team members frequently throughout the week because I want to be in the know and because I want them to know what's going on, right, as a business and as we're serving our clients. So what would you say, and you've talked about intentionality, you've talked about building relationships. What would you say in terms of our team? Like, what is one thing that you think that we've done a really good job at that could maybe serve the listener?
So I think we've done a good job at a lot of different things, but my favorite is probably the intentionality behind when we are together in person. We know that those times are limited. And I will say, so planning in that time for like just downtime, 20 minutes to literally just walk out into the open space and have a conversation that's not on the schedule per se. And just, again, being real. And one of the things that I will just give kudos to those who do come in, they understand and appreciate that day to day, we have a lot of different things that we upkeep around the office here. So when they walk in and, aren't afraid to change out the paper towel or, ask how they can help with this or that. It's that true camaraderie of, we're all in this together and I'm here this week and how can I help? So those are the types of things that it just feels so genuine and easy. It's to the point where we know that they have to go home, but we would love it if they could be here in person all the time. And I think once you kind of hit that piece, we always say it, there's no magic pill. None of this is fast. It takes time and the repeated efforts of all to really lean in. And to your point, 100% responsibility across the board. It's not on those of us in the office to filter all of the information out. It's not on those who are not in the office to make sure they're doing all the reach outs. It has to be a two-way street. It starts with respect, relationships, and trust.
Thank you for sharing that. This is really good, Stephanie. This is really, really good. We've covered a lot so far, and I want to change the topic a little bit to brand new people. We talked a little bit about you had talked about this at the beginning of the call. So let's talk a little bit more on like hiring new people, bringing new people on, even someone maybe even graduating from college. They've not been in the corporate workspace for 5 or 10 years like some of us, but so they're entering this remote workplace from college.
Yeah. And what's interesting is those who are coming in probably have so much that they could teach us, because especially in the last couple of years, they've kind of perfected the how to have friendships, how to go to class, how to do all the things remotely. And they're resilient. They've figured out a lot of different ways. So there's probably something they can teach the team as well. So going back to that, establishing a mentor-mentee relationship, it's fascinating because, again, understanding that the mentor has to remain open-minded and open-hearted, if you will, too, of what can I learn from the new individual that could benefit this team? Because we're all here, we're all lifelong learners, right? And you also don't want it to appear that you're just the person showing up to provide them all of the knowledge and wisdom. Because again, if that's the case, they might also put up a wall of like, okay, that what can I contribute? People want to know that they have meaning and purpose within the team as well. So letting them add early and often to what that culture continues to evolve to be in this new space. But I would also go back to, as far as models go, one of the first things that we do when we kick off any group, whether it is a workshop, a 2-day event, or our signature leadership transformation process, quite literally our entire first session is building out what we call trust accelerators. So we have an e-learning on it. If people are interested in I'll call it a shorter course versus the full leadership transformation process. But we go through this with all of these groups. So when we're kicking off this discussion of what does remote look like, the aha that we had on a specific strategy last week with the group was, hey, how do we bring this 10 experience? Because that's kind of how we establish the trust accelerators, is what does it take to have a 10 experience throughout this process? How do we build trust quickly? How do we give our initial deposit? And in the conversations, it was fascinating because, again, going back to there's no magic pill, there's no silver bullet, whatever you want to call it, understanding that you really need to get input from the team. And there are a lot of different types of meetings. So again, you have the one-to-ones, you have the team meetings, and then you have these bigger project or beyond meetings for global organizations. You're never going to control everyone's actions on these calls. But when you do have a team meeting or a status meeting weekly, that is within your locus of control. So we talked a lot about how does the team define the 10 experience, and thinking through things from, is the default that we should be on camera? And there was a joke. Somebody said, yeah, my team was worried that her hair was a mess. And she said, mine is too. And I really could care less, because what I want is what's going on in your brain. I don't care how your hair looks today.
Right.
And part of that being real and appreciating the fact that we're real as leaders too, because people aren't looking for the perfect leader. They want the real, they want the person that they know is authentic and that they can truly be open and honest with. So discussing some of that. And if there is a reason, like, I'm going to be driving today because I have XYZ planned, it's been discussed, but I'm going to be focused on the road, so I'll just be listening, or whatever it is. But what are the communication expectations? Are there windows of time if you work with a team across different time zones? This is what we would typically like to schedule in. So really thinking about what that good 10 experience looks like. And then if we, number one, can't meet that, and or if somebody is not following that. So creating those team norms, if you will, for the virtual meeting experience to add to the overall culture of a 10 experience as your team. And with that, going back to that mentor topic, this is a perfect spot for your mentor-mentee relationship to really flourish, and have the mentor talk about all of these things that are, how the team functions, and just so that they aren't the ones that don't put their video on and then feel like they're called out. But we talked a lot about that. And then, having some additional conversation of, well, is that the expectation then when they're on these larger project or global meetings? And I said, again, it comes back to conversation. Is that what the team wants to do? Because if you're the only one with your video on, it might be a little awkward, but understanding and appreciating that they are adults and they can make their own decisions in those other spaces. But as a team, we're committing to this way within our team meetings, and we believe that will provide the 10 experience. And it can start with personal stuff. That can be how you end it. We always talk about the check-in and the personal stuff being what's up front, because the work will take care of itself. But you have to get to know people, and you have to be honest about where you're at as a leader too. You know what? Some days are hard, and some days I really would just prefer in person. But at the same point, this is where we're at. And I'm so glad that I get to work with you, even though it's remote.
I really like how you touched on the mentor-mentee piece, because the mentee is going to be really impressionable. However, they have information that they could bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
The mentor is there to help that new person. However, the mentor needs that communication just as much as it's really both. It's accountability is probably the wrong word there, but each person needs each other to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
The mentor can say, hey, this is what we've done in the past. And the mentee might say, you know what, the last couple months I've been using this. Why don't we try this? And then each person can bring different things to the table.
And I love that you kind of called that out. It reminds me of when we're going through any of our PDP team scan profiles where we're talking about different strengths for the individuals on a team.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those pieces, always coming at it with the mindset of what does the other person, because we all have this inherent value, right? What does the other person bring to the table from strengths, perspectives, and keeping that open mind and growth mindset? It's just huge. And it's a pivot that it can help to take teams from really the good to great to world class, and appreciating that everybody, especially when you have a different personality type, what can you learn from that person? I mean, I'm a high extrovert. I might find this a lot easier than somebody who is not as direct or more introverted, or perhaps higher pace or conformity or whatever it is. So keeping all of that in mind, because you might have a whole team of high paced people and you really need to learn how to lead that type of a person because they bring a whole different perspective. But going again back to the mindset shift of everybody has strengths, everybody has purpose. We just get to work on unlocking that and building that trust as quickly as possible. And even the remote setting, it will help to accelerate the team in a huge way.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all this information. This has been really, really great, Stephanie. So as you are a transformation facilitator, you work with individuals, you work with organizations. What is the best way if someone wanted to connect with you online, what's the best way for someone to connect with you?
Oh my goodness. Any which way they can connect with me, they want to. But LinkedIn is probably the best way. Obviously, it is easiest as far as messaging for any of the social platforms from a professional standpoint. But if they're following me on Instagram or Facebook, that also works as well. Checking all of those messages. And of course, reaching out to us on the InitiativeOne website is huge. They can even just go to the info and it will get to me or anybody on the team if they're looking for anybody else specifically.
Perfect. Any closing thoughts, Stephanie, on remote work?
What I would just say is what works in person, while it has to be modified, the same principles apply and it works remotely as well. It boils down to communication, building trust, building relationships, and just treating each other as humans.
Building trust, building relationships, and just being a good human. I love that. That's really, really good. Thank you so much for joining the show. We really, really appreciate you jumping on here and answering these questions. If there's one organization that's dealing with this issue, there are many organizations that are dealing with this. So if this is the first time that you're either watching this or listening and you found value in this episode, feel free to share with a family member, a coworker, a colleague. If you found value and you think someone else could find value, go ahead and share. And our goal here is to reach out to as many people as we possibly can. And the best way that you could help us, the listener, is by leaving a rating or a review. And even more important, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Follow our podcast so that way you're not missing any future episodes. There are different events that we put on each and every month. And if you've not yet been on the InitiativeOne.com website, go to our site today, register for our next event. And remember, leadership is all about building relationships, building trust, and 100% communication. Thanks so much for joining today.